Welcome to a Counterspin Media special series. This multi-part series is a follow-up from episode 38, where with James Braithwaite we discussed jurisdiction and the Kingdom of David. Now I know, like many, I was somewhat skeptical to say the least. However, after delving into the information, the proverbial penny dropped, so to speak, and the pieces started to fit together. In this series, Kenneth Scott of the House of Cousins will join me to explore the many aspects of the system we all have come to know as the Matrix. Now, this information will not be for everyone, and it's because some have not reached the presence of mind or the awareness of oneself. So here, currently, I offer you a choice: the blue pill or the red pill. If you choose to continue to expand your life force, feeding a parasitical system of control and being subjugated to its every rule, regulation, and harvesting of your life force, then this is where your blue pill is prescribed and your story ends. If, however, you choose to realize your true power, your true purpose of self-creative capacity to change the reality and free yourself from the matrix that has held you in bonded servitude, then you're prescribed the red pill. Everything is a choice. To all those that choose the red pill, welcome to the journey of discovery, along a path that will ultimately lead back to you. It will not be an easy journey by any stretch of the imagination, because the greatest obstacle you will face, you will find, will indeed be you. Okay, joining me via Zoom from lands commonly referred to as the United States of America is Kenneth Scott. He holding the office of Overseer of the Panterra Private Society, and holding the office of Protecting Advocate for the PANTERRAVIDA Society. First of all, Ken, welcome to the show. There's a lot to get through, of course. Can you tell me first and foremost, what do those titles actually mean?
Good question. Well, people are used to, as you were saying before we started, such things as prime minister or president or things like that. And we tend to equate and make equal the person with the office. But the fact is, as the office is something that is in place and it's perpetual, it goes from one office holder to another. So it'd be more appropriate, more direct and accurate to say Scott Morrison holding the office of Prime Minister of Australia, or Donald Trump holding the office of President of the United States of America, which he still is doing, by the way. So everything in this world, in government and in political structure and in religious structures, is actually an office. And the way law works in this world is these offices are perpetual. In other words, they're a perpetuity. They last forever. They're like a extension into time. So when the saying goes, the king is dead, long live the king, what they're actually saying is the being or the person who's holding the office of king is dead, and the new king is now in the office, long live the new king, but kingship in the office remains constant. So this is known as a corporation soul. S-O-L-E, and the assets that accrue and are built up during the tenure of an office holder, whether king or president or whatever, stay with the office. So it enables the office to be perpetual, and the line of succession of an office holder goes from one office holder to the next, and the rules of that particular office or jurisdiction establish how long the office holder will hold the office. So in the United States, the president holds the office for 4 years. In the papacy, the Pope generally holds the office for a lifetime, and same with kings and queens and so forth. So it's best to refer to someone as the holder of the office of president or prime minister, and present or extend the whatever is being communicated to the office holder and all successors, which binds the future office holders. So when we've done, which we've done quite extensively, as you know, many processes in law, it's to the office holder and the successors in office. So I've taken all of my 30 years of deep research in law, and I've analyzed and deduced what is the actual foundational law form that the world system is being created with and by. And so I've mirrored or repeated that in creating our private societies. Our first society was called and is called Panterra de Oro, okay? As a singular office, because a corporation soul has a single office holder. It's, even though it has the word corporation, it does not use, doesn't have board of directors or officers or any and all of those things. It has a single office holder. That's why it's S-O-L-E, solo or soul. So we created the society, then we create the office, and then we put an office holder in that office. So in that regard, the office is called the Office of the Overseer for Panterra, which is how we set up everybody who repeats this structure in this model. They become the office holder of their society as overseer. You oversee the functions and the management of the office, holding the assets for the benefit and the application to the mission and purpose of the society. So it's often been asked to me, some kind of derogatorily, oh, well, Ken, you're setting this up so you can be the dictator. You own everything. It's your office. You're the overseer and so forth. But that's said without an understanding of law, because law creates a dynamic interface and structure between all component parts, which we can get into later. But if you understand how law works in the law form, you understand that the office holder is bound by the law of the jurisdiction of the society. And we've built Panterra to have true checks and balances. If you look at the history of the United States and the Constitution, it was supposed to be the most ideal way to create a governing structure with checks and balances, with the executive and the legislative and the judicial. But then if you look at the history, within a matter of 10 to 15 years, the judicial through the Supreme Court took overarching control of the power of the law and created the system by which law was created through the courts. And then if you have a democratic system of voting and so forth that puts in place those who are controlled and control the populace, then you have democracy without any function, because the demos or the populace, the population, can be controlled to always vote the way it's desired and put the judicial body in place. So they basically legislate from the bench. So exactly, I have mirrored that, but with true checks and balances, a real balance between the integration of law forms, which we can get into later, how it works. And in fact, the position of office holder of the Office of Overseer is one that is bound and aligned with the mission and the purpose of the society, in this case, Panterra. So Panterra de Oro, Panterra, the word Panterra is basically a double entendre. The word pan means across or whole or universal. Terra means the earth. But also Panterra in Romance language like Spanish or Latin means panther. Okay, or actually in science, the genus of large cats, or I think maybe all cats, is Panterra also. So basically and de oro means of gold or golden. So if I said it in Spanish, it would be Panterra dorado, which means of gold or golded or golden. So it means a golden panther across the world, an animal of power and grace, and stands with respect and sovereignty in his own domain while being universally applicable. So that's where the name and the office comes from. So in the case of DaVita, which I did do a video in the introductions to the Proclamation of Peace. But just to repeat that, Davida, of course, means of life. And it's an anagram of the name David. So the Davida Society is a society for life and for peace, basically. And so the office of protector and advocate is an office that I hold the office, but we're going to build quite extensively throughout every land, every private society within the protections and immunities and the sanctuary of the kingdom of David. And what is it that we're going to protect? Through the law and the jurisdiction, there are four primary things that when the people stand as the superior power and authority in law, there's four basic pillars or principles that are absolute and must be protected. That's our land, that's our law, that's our rights, and our estate. And when we have protected in full integrity, land, law, rights, and estate, we don't have to go around claiming we're a sovereign. You know, that's a bait and switch. That's something that was done to create the concept and the implementation starting here in the US of sovereign citizens, you know, and I'm sure you've heard of that, which is an oxymoron and a misnomer because you can't be a citizen, which is property of the state, and be sovereign. Okay. But unknowingly, most of these people going around saying that they're sovereign are really citizens. They haven't changed their status. And so they're in that oxymoronic, and that may be a play on words of moron, but unfortunately they are being moronic because they're not sovereign. So we dispense with that. We don't have to worry about that. If we're full and in full capacity of our sovereign integrity, and we are protected in our law, land, rights, and estate, we are the superior power.
You see, because me, like many others, have gone down so many rabbit holes trying to work out the system because I think everyone to a degree realizes something's not quite right. It doesn't feel right. You're always feeling out of sorts with it. No matter how many times you come at the system, we try to do a workaround, we try to dig under it, we try to go over it, we do everything we can to avoid it. But we always come against a brick wall. It's like life being a pick-a-path book, where the book is already written, the paths have already been predetermined, and no matter where we go, we're going to end up where we're going to end up, which is then at the beginning of yet another trial and tribulation. So how do you fight this system? Because because being with you in this journey of it fledgling, you're the master in that. But I had one of the hardest concepts I had to reconcile within myself was going to peace as opposed to going to war. As humans, well, not humans, because I know what that means now, but as men and women or beings, we're taught this is this, that's that, you do this, you do that, you get this result. And no matter how many times you want to challenge the system, they'll always come back with something that you just out of left field, or seemingly out of left field, that just makes any attempt to fight it fall on its face. For example, over here we have people, no doubt there as well, who do this affidavit of truth. They put an affidavit of truth in, basically saying, I'm this, try and prove me wrong. And then you have others who say, I don't have to pay tax because I'm not a taxpayer. And you've got the common law aspect. So I'm standing on common law. And then they'll quote something like the 1215 Magna
1215
Carta.
Yeah,
Magna Carta, all these things. And then, of course, now we've got the indigenous people here saying, oh, we're Māori, but they are drawing their recognition from a flag gifted by King William. And it doesn't make sense, considering in 1649, when King Charles' forces fought the parliamentary forces in England, King Charles' forces lost. He was beheaded for treason. And then from then on, Parliament ruled the roost. And
well, not from then on, but for that period, that
Yeah.
Cromwell was in control until Charles II was reseated in whatever year that was, 1660 or something like that.
So can you shed light on this? Because to be honest, life's quite confusing.
I'd be happy to. As you know already from studying some of our work, law is fundamentally contract. Contract is paramount, and contract is always rooted or connected to jurisdiction, to a law form. Jurisdiction means, in one approach to the etymology, it means the word of the law. Juris being law, diction meaning the word. But the word juris also means an oath. Taking an oath is equivalent to binding oneself through a contract. You pledge to the terms and conditions, and you've accepted the terms and conditions, and you've accepted the benefits or the consideration offered and accepted and received by the other party, in this case, really the state, then it becomes a binding contract. And we have all bound ourselves to very precisely designed over hundreds and thousands of years, a binding jurisdiction and a binding contract, including all of the first people or the originals, whether they're Maori in New Zealand or the originals in Australia or the native tribes here in America and so forth. The world has many thousands of bands or tribes of first people, the original people on the land, who essentially energetically, or you can call it in a spiritual definition, had a contract with the earth. That was their land, that was their jurisdiction or territory to steward. And they lived by the natural order and the natural rules of the land, and in relative peace, although progressively it wasn't all paradisical. They were many times at war with each other, and but basically then there became you have a movement sweep through history going back 5,000, 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 years, arriving at a period in Rome 2,000 years ago where you have the institution of Roman civil law, which was the law of the military conqueror. When the Roman system and the Roman army in Europe conquered lands, they instituted Roman civil law, which is the law of containment. The rules and the mechanisms by which a conquered territory and a conquered people would be contained in a body called the civitas, which is where we get the word civil, which is the root of the word civilization. So what was the age of exploration and conquest starting in 1492? What was it defined as? Civilizing the heathen or the Saracens or the pagans or whatever, and civilizing them, which basically meant conquering them and bringing them under a military occupation, giving them civil rules and civil rights, which are simply privileges given down by the state or the military occupier to maintain civil order. And this evolved through hundreds of years, thousands of years, until the late 1890s, 1899, the world nation states came together in what's called conventions in the World Court in the city of Rotterdam and the Hague World Court, and they entered into conventions. And in 1899, they had a convention to establish the rules of war on land and how this system of conquest would be applied on land. Because when we're talking about military occupation and civil procedure and civil rules, we call them civil laws and civil rights, we're talking about maritime or water jurisdiction. So there were certain things put in place from the 1850s to the 1890s and the first few years of the 1900s to bring the land of water, not the land, the law of water onto the land. And what is water called? Maritime or martial. That's where war is established as maritime rules. And you have Admiralty rules, which is the law of the ship. So the Admiralty in London establishes its absolute authority and vests somebody called a captain of a ship. And that captain holds a title called Esquire, because the lowest rank somebody must have to qualify as a captain of a ship in the Admiralty is Esquire. And Esquire is issued as a title of nobility out of the Inns of Court and the Temple Bar in the City of London and all of that. So it's all about bringing the law of war onto the land. Okay, so we remain in the system, the maritime admiralty system, when we become a conquered people. And this is what happened. The Romans conquered Europe. Where's Roman civil law, the foundation of law? It's in Europe. Where else is it found? It's found in Latin America. Latin, as in Roman. And who conquered from Tijuana to the tip of Tierra del Fuego? Who conquered that territory? The Spanish. Well, who was the king of Spain starting in 1519, 1520? He was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire.
Ah, right.
So this is why we have civil law, Roman civil law, in militarily conquered territories and people in Latin America and Europe. Okay. But they also created English law because they wanted to create bifurcations, multiple bifurcations, coming from the original Roman Curia, the Roman court, the Roman church, the early AD 300s, Constantine, and so forth. And in the 600s, they created a bifurcation. They went to Islam. They have the Mohammedan law, okay, to take up the Middle East and Northern Africa and Indonesia and so forth. And then 900 years later, they have Henry VIII rebels against Rome, supposedly. But did he really? No, not really. He was part of the plan. Okay. But they made the show of it, and they made the history of it, that King Henry VIII said, well, I'm breaking away and I'm creating the Anglican Church. Okay. Following Martin Luther and Calvin and those others who protested against Rome and said, well, we're going to become the Protestant bifurcation from Roman law. And so then you have English common law. You have 1215, which is supposedly the foundation of that. But who were the signatories to that document?
Nobles, weren't they?
The nobles, the landed gentry, the barons, the land holders. And how did they have land? They had land because they entered into contract with the sovereign, the king, or the crown. And that contract was a reciprocation between a grant of land made patent by the sovereign, the king, who was previously made patent by the papacy, given a patent on the title. And that's what made patent is perfecting the title. But who grants that title? The Pope, who is the priest, who then creates the king. The priest is going to control the law. In this case, in our world system, the law is controlled by something called the Holy See and the Roman Curia. Do you know where the words Holy See comes from?
Something to do with the water, conquest?
No,
Earth?
Well, there is a homophone, which is same sound. See, when it's in the Roman church, it's spelled S-E-E. Okay.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of variations or ramifications of that word. You can see something as in with an all-seeing eye. You can create a homophone, which means the same sound but a different meaning, which means the sea, S-E-A, as in the Sea of Commerce, within the Maritime Admiralty civil conquered, militarily conquered world system. And you can also say the letter C, the first capital letter of the word commerce. So it's the Sea of Commerce, it's a sea of debt, it's a sea of martial authority, it's a sea of martial conquest, everything I've just talked about. The actual root of those two words, those are English words, anglicized words, but it comes from Latin, which was sedus sanctum, S-E-D-A-S, which means seat. And what seat is that supposed to be? It's the throne or the seat of Peter, who was supposedly given the authority to create a church. And then that authority was passed on through something called the apostolic succession. Succession, again, a permanent office called a seat. We're going to call it sanctified or sanctum, holy seat, given by Jesus in the storyline to create a permanent rock, which goes back to the rock of Abraham, where Yahweh said, Abraham, kill me a son, kill me your firstborn son, and then I will make a covenant which will bind your seed or your genetics to become the authority of the law under my priest and under my ultimately sanctified seat. And so you have the Holy See, and out of which comes the court called the Roman Curia. The Roman Curia is the highest court in this world system to date. That Roman Curia controls the judicial system of all the corporations under the United States and the bankrupt corporate system, whether it's New Zealand bankrupt national corporation, Australia, Mexico, or whatever. They're all subdivisions under a master corporation that was put into bankruptcy in 1933, and simultaneously completing a military conquest and occupation that started in the Civil War. You know, they sometimes call it the war between the states, but they now mainly call it a civil war because its ultimate purpose was to put the people into the civil body. So we have the appearance and the illusion of common law, but in fact, we're militarily conquered, bankrupt entities within Roman civil procedure and civil code. So the common law of the people is an illusion. The common law of the landed gentry who entered into oaths of fealty with the land grantor, the sovereign, the king, and everything I just described, who then reciprocated mutual consideration. You grant me land, you perfect it by patent, letter patent, and I reciprocate by giving you an oath of loyalty or fealty.
Yeah.
Then I become the liege lord over my land and people. I become the lord of the manor or the house. I'm the lord of the house or the manor as the liege lord over the landless peasants and the serfs. And the word liege is the root of the word allegiance, oath of allegiance, liege lord.
Right.
Who do you give your liege or your allegiance to? It's also the root for the word legislation, legislature, and those civil laws created by the body that's appointed by the military occupier to issue binding codes and statutes that bind the civitas or the civil body to have to comply because they've entered into contracts, they've accepted the benefits and the privileges and haven't taken the steps to sever those attachments. And so and that includes the first peoples who used to be the stewards on the land, but now there are basically a quasi nation within a nation. So they have not really returned to the land in the proper way, lawfully within the system, rather than fighting it. And you use the phrase, how do we fight this? And the answer is we don't, because for as long as we fight it, we're on a field of battle, we're in a military conquered jurisdiction and territory, and the rules of engagement have been long established since before we were born, you and I. If you're 80 years old, it happened just when you were born, and if you're 90, just before you, I mean, just after you were born. But for 99% of the population on the planet, after we were born, these were the rules of the game.
Yeah.
So rather than fight the rules, our task is to know them and understand them and integrate them. Because the problem that you describe, which is the problem of 99.9% of the good intended people who want to be free, want to break free of all of this, they don't understand the rules of engagement. They don't understand they're in somebody else's sandbox who made the rules. And for as long as you're in their sandbox, it's their toys and their sand and their box, and you have to follow the rules because you entered voluntarily into their contract.
Yeah. Here's a curler. I often have interesting discussions, we won't call them debates or arguments, well, actually they are, but let's just say discussions, with people who are what I call so heavily biblicified that they can't see past their book. They honestly believe that somewhere, somehow, something, or their God or representative thereof is going to come and with a stroke of a sword or pen, make everything better for them. Even I, right from when I was younger, never bought into it, because I always wondered why you would wait for someone else to do it as opposed to do it yourself. Like I said to pastors here on a recent Zoom when they're arranging protests against this government because it's getting very bad over here, very dictatorial, that if you all stepped out of your church, rolled up your sleeves and actually did what you prayed to have done, we could fix this tomorrow. But how do I get through to those people? How do I say that you're actually barking up the wrong tree here?
Yeah, well, let's slightly modify that statement. They're not barking up the wrong tree. They're on the right tree, but they're gnawing on the bark, which is the outer superficial covering of the tree. That's actually the dead part of the tree. Okay, you know, the bark is dead, right? Okay,
yeah,
well, I think
entity, right.
So the living heart of the tree is in the center of the tree. Okay, the bark is the dead outer skin that protects the living part. So I'm glad you used that exact phrase, barking up the wrong tree. No, they're on the right tree, but they're gnawing on the bark, which is dead, devoid of nutrition, as in the intelligence of information that's properly understood. Yeah. And that's where the system wants them to be, barking at the tree, gnawing on the bark of the tree, and never getting to the heart of the living heart of the tree, where all the true knowledge and information is well laid out. It's hidden in plain sight. You know, those who would own us and eat us for their lunch, which is very self-evident at this point in time, have been trained through multiple generations going back at least 5,000 or 6,000 years. Really a lot longer than that, but let's just say in our known history, 6,000 years, okay? Or say 5,000 years. The first known dynasty or named dynasty of Egypt was in roughly 3,100 BC. So that's 5,100 years ago. So let's say 5,000 years. But the Egyptian system was a derivative of the Sumerian system, out of which evolved the Babylonian system, the Akkadian system, the Assyrian system, eventually crystallized into a truly succinct, integrated whole system in Rome. And we're still living in Rome. Okay, we're still living in the empire because the world system basically goes through the monetary system, or up until this point, the Federal Reserve, which is in where? New York City, in the empire state, you know. So they tell you what they are doing. This is the empire, okay? So we're living in the Roman Empire, which is a crystallization and an integration of Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, and so forth. And so they've been building this for 5,000 years. And all the family lines and the bloodlines and the secret societies have been teaching what needs to be done by their minions and their accolades and their mid-managers and their upper managers and their royal, so-called royal lines, to be part of a cabal based on all of their esoteric systems. And if you look at the Egyptian system, off of which is mirrored or built the Masonic system, which has been going on
for containment within.
Yeah, the two pillars, but also the floor. What's the floor in Westminster Abbey, which is where the Anglican Church of the royal, so-called royal line there, that is now the head of the Commonwealth, 143 countries on the planet, supposedly in the English common law, but they're all conquered. They're conquered through monetary conquering of voluntary acceptance of rules of bankruptcy and being part of the civil body and all of that. So what is on the floor of Westminster Abbey?
Black and white tiles?
Yeah, black and white. Okay.
Duality.
Where else do we have black and white tiles? On a chessboard or a checkerboard? Yeah, well, Freemasonry, of course, the same thing. Yeah. But they put us on a chessboard or a checkerboard, and they have a white side and a black side. You know, I'll be the white guys because I'm a good guy, and oh, you be the black guys because you're the bad guy this time. You know, remember we used to play that when we were kids?
Yeah.
So,
that's right.
And they taught us
actually fights about that. Huh? We used to fight over which one would have.
Right, exactly.
Even before we played the game, we'd fight.
We've been trained to fight. You know, you said, how do we fight against this? How we fight against it, we stop fighting. We don't play the game. But we have to know the game and master it and bring it back from being a mirror reflection of the original game, which is the game of life, the true template of living systems, because their system is a cult of death. Everything about it is dead and death. And so they want us to be chewing on the dead bark instead of returning to our true magnificence as living beings. So when you go through those esoteric systems, in Egypt, it was called the left eye of Horus and the right eye of Horus. Well, we have a left brain that's linear, and we have a right brain that's more nonlinear, holographic. And the way I have achieved my ability to see what most people don't see is working to actually develop both sides of my brain and integrate it. And I've done that quite well. I have a very capable intellectual capacity to see things precisely in a linear fashion, logic, deductive reasoning, and so forth, but I see it in a nonlinear whole system way. And in order to understand the system, you have to do that. And that's what the Freemasonic societies and the rites and the rituals and all the rest of it, and the bloodlines who are taught this from birth, what they're taught. But they're taught how to rise above the polarized mass consensus global narrative, what I call the mass hallucination, because it's a hallucination, as if it's real. But to rise above it and know how to play both sides against the middle. I mean, look at the history of the Rothschild banking cartel. They always funded both sides, you know. They had no horse in the game that they were hoping would win. They had 2 horses in the game or 5 horses, and they were guaranteed they always were going to win. And it was worth the investment to bet on the other or the other 3 or 4 horses, knowing that only one would win, because the cost of doing business was far below the cost of victory, which was assured, because they had every horse in the game or the race.
So religion itself.
We'll get back to that. But let's talk about going to peace.
Yes.
Going to peace.
I need to listen to this one.
Yeah. This is not a new age platitude of putting flowers in the guns that have just finished shooting your friends on Kent State University or something like that. Okay. It's a nice idea, but it's also another bait and switch. Okay. You know, what's the symbol of peace? There are 2 symbols. One is an animal, one is a drawn symbol.
Yeah. It's like a circle with an upside down sort of cross.
Yeah. Yeah.
Drapes.
What do you know what that actually symbolizes?
Haven't got a clue. I just thought it was
peace. It symbolizes a crucified man with broken arms hanging upside down.
That's not very peaceful, is it?
No, but that's what it is. That's what you, in our conversation the other day that we had, and you had said you had viewed up until I said something different to you. I don't know where you've gone from it with it from there. But you had said symbols are bullshit. They're inanimate, but they're anything but that. Okay.
Yeah, 'cause I always thought it was the use of them that made them either or.
Well, the use is inherent in the fact that they're everywhere. You know, we drive through town and we're inundated with symbols, you know,
Absolutely.
every single moment. You know, we, you know, I don't know what it's like over there, but here we have stop signs that are octagonal. Okay. So what's that doing in our mind? It is inducing or inducting a message which has an organic living substance behind it to stop every time you consider octagonal structures. And what's an octagonal? It's an octave. It's a resounding harmonically of the previous tone at a multiple harmonic pitch. Okay. We live in a world of 7 frequencies or 7 tones. We have 7 continents. We have 7 energetic systems people call chakras. We have 7 colors that have a known frequency within a visible spectrum. What we are working towards energetically, spiritually, organically in this world is to complete the octave and to integrate all 7 of those frequencies. And when we do that, we are going to graduate to another level of power and capacity within these human forms, bodies, and genetics and systems that far exceeds everything known in this world of the living beings in these bodies. But we've been, every day we drive around, stop, stop, stop. Don't go to that octave. Don't complete it. Okay. And on. Okay. There's the pentagon, which is basically the upside down pentagram. And, you know, there's a lot of things in genetics and chemistry, mathematics about what a pentagonal form is. And then there's a hexagonal form. There's a lot of things about that, you know, which gets into astrology and Saturn and many other things. And, you know, and then we have the brands that are developed by logos of corporations, dead bodies. Okay, brands.
Yes.
What are brands for? Well, they're hot irons that steer into the rump of a cattle to brand it, to own it, and control it. Well, we accept brands, which are symbols, every day, you know, and we're just part of a mass population in a market share according to brands. But now we know from BlackRock and Vanguard, the information that's come out about them recently is that BlackRock owns Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola. So the illusion of choice, well, I like Pepsi. I'd never go to Coca-Cola, but BlackRock says, great, I win there or I win there. Same with Democrats and Republicans, et cetera.
Back to your battlefield scenario where you said they got both sides anyway. So regardless,
if you fight, you've lost because you're in their game, and it's a game of war. So we're taught from the very beginning to play checkers, which is a 2-sided battle, or chess or whatever. So it is so deeply ingrained to go to war that it takes a magnitude of inner strength and power to go to peace within oneself. Because there's something that I have talked about for many years called the enemy construct. That's a program, that's an insert it was literally inserted into our genetics and into our mind constructs and mind control and programming for a very long time. We're separated from ourselves because we're separated from that inner living heart of the tree rather than the bark. And we're constantly at war with ourselves, but we don't want to admit that, so we project it outside of ourselves. So we go to war with the government or the banks or the enemy or the United States versus the Russians or whatever the flavor of the month is. So what's required to go to peace, it's not just a platitude. It takes a level of integration internally and strength and fortitude underwritten by the knowledge and the integrated knowledge of how the system really works, how the law really works. Because what you described in the beginning, as far as Oh, it's secured creditor. Oh, it's acceptance for value. Oh, no, it's affidavits of truth. No, it's liens in commerce. It's notices of liability. It's all these things. Those are the superficial games that have been given to us that have the similitude of power in law, but have no substance. It's all form. Okay. What we're doing in reintegrating the knowledge and understanding of the law and related systems is rebuilding the substance inside of ourselves, because we are integrally connected to this universe we're in, which has principles that are absolute. And those absolute principles you could call law. But they're not law in the way that people think of law. They're not like, you can do this and you can't do that. No, they're principles by which life has been templated in this reality. Okay. And there are such things as do unto others as you would have to do with them. That's the law of karma. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, look at all the neighbors who are battling each other. It tells you that's to what level and degree or lack thereof they love themselves, because there's so much at war by the programming and the social unrest and the economic uncertainty and the insecurity of it all that they can't come to peace.
Yeah, that's and we see that every day for sure. The hardest thing, I suppose, for us, we'll call us normal people because it's the normal way we do life at the moment until we get the knowledge to be able to look internally to then express externally and change things around. The system seems that no matter how we, like you said, fight it, it'll always win. But I suppose the fear amongst people is if they do go all peaceful, then they're just going to be wiped out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, of course,
peaceniks up to battle an army who's well equipped, resource, just going to run you over.
Sure. And that's absolutely true. Within the up till now current system, okay, it goes back still to the fundamental. All law is contract. Contract creates the binding relationship to a jurisdiction. So jurisdiction is essentially paramount. Okay, you are bound to a national corporation called New Zealand, with which you have an oath of allegiance by contract and performance, because you've been performing on the requirements of the contract for your whole life. So no matter what kind of affidavits of truth you're going to put on the court system and say, well, I'm this and I reject you and I rescind this and whatever, you first of all have not conformed. That word form, their system is form without substance. But you have to conform, or as I like to say, the only way out is in. If you push out and you stretch away, that rubber band eventually is going to lose elasticity and it's going to pull you back in. Okay. What is it holding you to that stake that holds you within their jurisdiction? Law, contract, and jurisdiction. Okay, so up until now, we haven't had a jurisdiction that would absolutely trump their binding structures that we're attached to. This is what I sought for the last 30 years. I knew once I got introduced or entered into the pursuit of law, which basically was late 1988, 89. And certain events happened in my life in the 80s, led up to certain things that happened in November of 1988, which was I declared bankruptcy on a business. I was in the gem and jewelry business, and I had suffered a major theft and robbery. I lost everything, and I was floundering for 5 years trying to recoup from it, and I eventually couldn't, and I had to file bankruptcy. And then my accountant said to me, well, you know, all those loss carry forwards, which is in the IRS system, you can carry a loss forward when you've had a legitimate business loss, which I did. And then that will offset tax liability. So I did certain things. The gem business in the late 70s, early 80s was a very laissez-faire business that you could do a lot of things without having to report them. So I managed my entire life to never pay more than a couple $1,000s in taxes. Then through the gem business where I made millions of dollars, but I could structure things in a certain way. But then I lost all of that gem inventory and so forth. And then I had a legitimate way to file a loss carry forward and show that I was making money, but I didn't have to pay taxes. Well, when I filed bankruptcy, my accountant said, all those loss carry forwards disappear. You're going to have to start paying taxes next year. And I said, well, you know, I really like, and I've grown used to not having to pay taxes to the government. I'm not going to continue. I'm not going to go back to paying taxes. He said, well, I don't advise that. And I said, that's why you're fired, and I'm going to go figure it out. So that's Brilliant. What started me in the pursuit of law. And because of my nature, yes, I was pursuing my own benefit and my own ability to free myself, but it was never for just myself. I have always had an inner passion to find real solutions that were universally applicable for everybody on this planet, or at least at that time, everybody in the United States. I wasn't thinking about Canada and Australia and all the rest of it. But when we founded Panterra, especially 10 years ago when we started having members come in from Africa and Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, then I started having to think in bigger terms, global terms. Okay. When I dove deeper and deeper, and I went through layers of commerce that very few people have done, because I was fortunate to meet extraordinary mentors starting in everything that I described to you was 89 and 90. By 1990, 91, I was meeting people I actually knew who were the grandfathers of the system or of the movement, who had studied in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they were mature in their knowledge at that time. And I met some of the best, some of the ones who, if you studied law, many people know of these guys, their names. They wrote books, and Irwin Schiff, who wrote things about the tax system, and Richard McDonald, who pioneered state citizenship, states as being superior to the federal, and all of them. Okay, so by 95, thereabouts, I had a very, very strong grounding in the law from the masters at that time. And then things about commerce, you speak of affidavits of truth. Well, I was doing that in 1995, and I was doing literally the best of the best at that time. I was being guided by people who had 10, 20, 30 years of seasoning in the law. So that's how far back my provenance goes in the law, really to the 60s, because some of the people I was studying with, like I just said. So from 1995 until 2011, I did everything you know about and a whole lot more in commerce. And I'm not saying this as I, me, mine, to gloat and say, look at me. I'm saying it simply because I have the grounding and the depth in the real experience of how it works, what worked and what didn't.
And of course, you're paving the way for other people to be able to access that knowledge, because I see on Gemstone University website, a YouTube channel, I go there as a go-to, and I listen to the shows there. I even go to sleep with them on, just to get it through my thick skull, because believe me, this is hard to get through sometimes.
I can see. It doesn't let any hair grow on that thick skull.
Exactly. I just say that's my brain. It's just grown so much. It's pushed the follicles out. So I'll stick with that one. Solar panel for a machine, which I'm realizing I can now control this machine and go beyond it. So that's fascinating. What we'll do, we'll break here. We'll take a break here. We'll come back for the second hour with Kenneth Scott. to delve into this and a lot more, and believe me, you won't be disappointed, because this has been blowing my mind for ages, and it's put me on a path quite unlike I was on before.
You can find Counterspin, New Zealand's media revolution, at counterspinmedia.com. And now, on the InfoWars network at band.video.